Welcome to this heartfelt story, where you will see the power of a mother's love and the strength it gives to soldiers in their hardest times. Listen closely and let this tale remind you of the bonds that can survive even the darkest storms. I am an old man now, but I still remember that day clearly. The air was cold, and the sky was grey in the morning. My soldiers stood in a perfect line, their uniforms neat and their faces serious. They did not know what was coming, only that they must be ready. Their boots were firm on the ground, their hands by their sides, waiting for orders, just as they had always done. I had told them an important officer would come to see them. They believed me and trusted my words. That was what soldiers did. They obeyed. But today was different. Today, I was not just their officer. I was something more. I was the person who would return something they had lost. I walked among them, looking at their young faces. They were strong and brave, but they were still boys who missed home. I had seen it in their eyes during quiet times, when the fighting was far away. They talked about their families, their mothers' voices, their fathers' lessons, their childhoods before the war. They never said it directly, but I knew they missed home, warmth, and love. The door in front of them was closed, and behind it a surprise waited. My heart beat faster. I had planned this for months. I knew it would change them, and it would change me too. At first, it was only a small idea, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt it had to happen. These boys had seen too much pain, fear, and loss. Today, they needed something different. Then the door opened. The room went silent. No one moved. The soldiers stared, their eyes wide. Slowly, one by one, they saw their mothers standing there. Their hands were shaking, and their eyes were full of tears. Some mothers were older, with grey hair and bent backs, others younger, still full of energy. But they all had the same look of deep love. A young soldier gasped. Another covered his mouth. I watched as the first mother stepped forward. Her son stood frozen. She opened her arms, and he ran to her without thinking. She held him tight and kept saying his name. He closed his eyes and held on to her like he would never let go. Other soldiers moved too. Some walked slowly, their hands shaking. Others ran, forgetting their training, forgetting everything except this moment. The room filled with soft crying and whispers. I stood still, watching, and my chest felt heavy. This was not war. This was love. This was what they had been fighting for all along. I kept watching as it happened. I had never seen anything like this in all my years as an officer. The room, once full of discipline and silence, was now alive with emotion. These soldiers, who were strong and fearless in battle, were only sons again in front of their mothers. The burden of war seemed to disappear for a short time. Some soldiers held on to their mothers, as if afraid they might disappear like a dream. Others stood silent, unable to believe what they saw. A few tried to speak, but their lips trembled. Some had not seen their mothers in years. They had left as boys and returned as men changed by war. But in their mother's arms, they were boys again. I stepped back to give them space. I had done my part. This moment was theirs now. I had expected smiles and happiness, but I did not expect the deep, raw emotions that filled the room. Some mothers cried openly, their hands always touching their sons' faces, tracing their cheeks, their jawlines, the scars that war had given them. One mother touched a scar on her son's forehead. He tried to smile, but his lips shook. She pressed her hand to his face, her own eyes full of words she could not say. Another soldier, tall and strong, fell to his knees before his mother, holding her hands to his forehead. She kissed his hair and whispered something only he could hear. For years, I had seen these men fight, struggle, and survive. I had given them orders and trained them for war. But now I saw something else. The children they once were, the love they still had, the need for comfort they had hidden so well. For the first time, I felt how heavy the cost had been. I swallowed hard. I had thought I was doing what was right, what was needed, but now I understood these soldiers had given up far more than their time or their youth. They had lost the simple comfort of a mother's hug, the soft sound of her voice saying their name. Today, even for just a moment, they had it back. And in that moment, I knew I had never done anything more important in my whole life. I stood in the corner of the room and let myself take a deep breath. The air felt heavy with feelings, happiness, sadness, relief. I had seen these soldiers stand strong in battle without fear, but now they stood in front of their mothers with shaking hands and tears in their eyes. It was a strange sight, but it felt more real than anything I had seen on the battlefield. One young soldier caught my eye. He was usually one of the toughest men, always calm and ready, but now he looked like a boy again, standing stiffly in front of his small, frail mother, whose hair was streaked with grey. She lifted her hands to touch his face, unsure at first, like she was afraid he might disappear. When she touched him, he closed his eyes, and tears ran down his face. She pulled him into a hug, saying his name softly over and over. His shoulders shook, and I turned away to give him his moment. In another part of the room, a mother held her son's hands tightly, as if to keep him close. "You have lost weight," she said, in a soft but strong voice. The soldier nodded, smiling through tears. "They don't feed us like you do, Mama," he replied. She laughed and wiped his face with her sleeve, just like when he was a little boy playing outside. Some soldiers tried to hold back their feelings, standing straight and strong like they had been trained. But as their mother's warm hands touched them, their walls broke down. The room was no longer full of soldiers, but of sons, men who had acted strong for years but needed this moment more than they could say. I felt a lump in my throat. I had thought this was just a small reunion to lift their spirits before the next mission. But now I saw how much these men had truly given up. It was more than their time and youth. They had given up the safety of home, the simple touch of someone who had loved them before they ever became soldiers. The room was filled with quiet voices, gentle laughter through tears, and comforting words. The weight of war was still there, but for the first time in years, it felt lighter. I stepped outside for a moment and looked at the setting sun. The light covered everything in gold. I had seen sunsets like this many times before, but today felt different. Today, I was not just an officer. I was a witness to something stronger than war, to love, to healing, to something no battle could destroy. For the first time in years, I felt hope. As I stood by the door, watching the soldiers and their mothers, memories of my own past came back. I had once been like them, a young man in uniform, strong from training, but soft at the thought of home. I remembered my mother straightening my uniform, hoping it would keep me safe. She had died years ago, but in every mother here, I saw her, in every gentle touch, every quiet word. A soldier sat on a bench with his mother beside him, her hand resting on his. He had always been quiet, serious, the type who never spoke much. But now he was talking, really talking, about the long nights on duty, about the cold mornings before sunrise, about lying awake thinking of home. She listened to him closely, her eyes full of love. Across the room, another soldier held his mother's hand. His fingers were rough from years of training. "I didn't think I would see you again," he said, his voice steady, though his eyes were full of emotion. His mother brushed back his hair and said softly, "You are here now," and that was enough. The air was filled with deep feelings. Some soldiers held their mother's hands quietly, afraid to let go. Others laughed and cried, sharing stories about their childhood and the days before war had taken away their innocence. I saw one soldier standing alone by the window. His mother had not come. I could see the pain in his eyes. An older woman, a stranger to him, walked over and gently placed a hand on his arm. She didn't know him, but she understood. He looked at her and nodded, accepting her silent comfort. I turned away, swallowing the tightness in my throat. I had always seen the army as a place of rules and strength, but in that moment, I saw something more powerful, the power of love, which no training could take away. As the time to leave came closer, the mood changed. Mothers hugged their sons tighter, spoke a few last words, and looked at their faces like they wanted to remember every line. The soldiers, used to being strong and serious, let their shoulders relax and allowed themselves to be sons again, even if just for a short time. As I watched them, I knew this day would stay with them, no matter where they went, no matter how far from home they traveled. They would carry this moment in their hearts, because today, for the first time in a long time, they were not just soldiers, and they were loved. As the minutes slipped by, the soldiers and their mothers held on to every second they still had together. Some quietly spoke words of love and comfort, while others just sat in silence, trying to memorize the faces they had missed for so long. The room, which had been full of nervous energy before, now felt heavy with feelings, happiness, longing, and the deep sadness of knowing this moment could not last forever. One mother gently brushed her son's uniform, wiping away invisible dust just like she had when he was a child. "You must eat well," she reminded him. "You must look after yourself." He nodded and smiled, even though they both knew her words meant more than just food. They were about the life she wished she could still protect. He squeezed her hand, trying to give her comfort. "I will, Mama," he said. Across the room, another soldier hugged his mother tightly. She felt smaller and more fragile than he remembered. He had left home when her hair was only starting to turn grey, and now he saw the marks of time clearly on her face. "I miss you every day," he told her, his voice rough with emotion, but he didn't care. Today, he was not only a soldier, he was her son. Some soldiers tried to stay strong, standing straight as if discipline could hold back the powerful feelings inside. But soon, even the toughest among them allowed themselves to be vulnerable. They let their mothers see the boys they used to be, their worries, their pain, and their deep, hidden love. I noticed a young soldier sitting quietly with his mother. He hadn't spoken since she arrived, his fists clenched tightly in his lap, his body tense. She reached out and placed her hands over his, gentle and comforting. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "I know." His shoulders shook, and for the first time in years he let himself cry. In the far corner, an older woman sat with a soldier who was not her son. She had come because his mother could not be there. She held his hand kindly, treating him like her own, and I saw gratitude in his tired eyes. He may not have had his real mother, but he was not alone. As the last minutes drew near, I felt a heavy ache in my chest. I had planned this meeting as a kind gesture, something simple, but I now understood it was much more. This was not just a meeting. It was a reminder of who these men truly were underneath their uniforms, sons, brothers, boys, who still longed for the warmth of home. I cleared my throat and stepped forward. "It's time," I said softly. The room went quiet, and no one moved at first. Then, slowly, the mothers and sons stood up, unwilling to let go. There were last hugs, whispered promises to write, and quiet prayers sent into the air. Looking around, I knew this day would stay with them forever. Wherever they went, however far they traveled from home, it would be a small light in the darkness, a memory to hold on to during lonely nights. It was time to go. The soldiers stood close to their mothers, not wanting to part. Some held their mothers' hands a little longer, gripping tight as if to freeze this moment in their hearts. Others looked away, their eyes full of feelings they could not share. The air was filled with unspoken words, love too deep for a simple goodbye. One by one, the soldiers straightened their backs, letting their training return. They had spent years learning to stand strong and tall, even in the hardest times. But now, standing in front of the women who had given them life, they were simply sons again. I saw young men pause, pressing their lips together to hide the pain of leaving. One soldier quickly wiped his eyes, hoping no one saw, but his mother noticed. She didn't say anything, only held his face in her hands and smiled, her eyes full of pride. The mothers also found it hard to let go. One woman slipped a small note into her son's pocket and whispered, "Read this when you feel lonely." Another mother kissed her son's forehead like she had when he was little, her fingers brushing through his short hair. "I'll be waiting," she promised. Her son nodded, too choked up to answer. I stood by the door and watched as the final goodbyes were shared. Some soldiers had already turned away, their jaws tight as they tried to stay strong, but when they reached the door, many glanced back one last time. Their mothers stood watching them, their faces soft and caring, just like when they had sent them off to school years ago. Then, breaking the silence, one mother called out, "Take care of yourself, my boy." Her son turned and gave her a small, sad smile before walking into the hallway. That single voice started a wave of more voices, gentle goodbyes, reminders to eat, promises to write. It was as if they could not let go, as if they needed one more moment, one more word to hold on to. When the last soldier had left, the mothers stood together, some leaning on each other for support. Their sons were gone again, back to their duties, back to the world of discipline and war. But something had changed. The weight of love, the memory of home, would stay with the soldiers long after this day was over. As I turned to leave, my heart felt heavier than I had expected. I had thought this was just another duty, another event to arrange. But as I walked down the hallway, I realized this moment had meant everything. These men would carry today with them through long nights and endless marches. When the world felt cold, they would remember the warmth of their mother's arms, the quiet power of their love, and maybe, in their darkest moments, that love would help guide them home. Days turned into weeks, and the soldiers returned to their hard routines. The sound of boots on gravel, the bark of orders, the endless drills, all these things came back. But something was different now. When fear tried to take hold of them, they remembered their mothers' voices. When the nights grew long and lonely, they remembered warm hands on their cheeks and kind words whispered into their ears. One night, during a quiet watch, a young soldier who had hardly spoken before turned to his friend and showed him a folded piece of paper. It was the note his mother had given him. The friend smiled and nodded, understanding without words. They were stronger because they had been reminded of what was waiting for them at home. As the months went on, some soldiers wrote letters more often. Some closed their eyes before sleep and pictured their mothers waiting, patient and proud. Even in the middle of battle, when the world seemed to break apart, they held on to the memory of that day. And the officer who had planned it all, the man who thought he was only doing his duty, found peace too. He realized that even in war, there could be a place for love and hope. He watched his soldiers stand taller, their courage stronger, their hearts steadier. Years later, when the war was over, many of those young men came home at last. They stepped off trains, walked through village gates, and found their mothers waiting, arms open and tears ready. Those reunions were full of the same deep love that had been shared on that day long ago. And as they hugged each other, they knew one truth. No matter how far they had traveled, no matter what they had faced, love had been their greatest strength. In the end, the officer sat on his porch, older and slower now, but still watching the world with calm eyes. He thought of all those mothers, of all those sons, and felt proud, because war can take many things, but it cannot destroy the bond between a mother and her child. That love would live on, stronger than any battle, brighter than any darkness. And that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more moving stories like this one. Tell us in the comments what love and courage mean to you. We'd love to hear your thoughts.